Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. We would like to welcome you to today's session of the Azure webinar series, running highly available full-stack Node.js apps with Azure and NearForm. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a little bit of housekeeping. On your webinar console, on the top left corner, you're going to find a Q&A box. And we do have subject matter experts with us that will be answering questions in real time, so please feel free to pop questions into that anytime during the webinar. We will also try to leave some time at the end to answer some of those questions live. On the top right-hand corner of your console, you're going to find a resources box. And in that, we have a whole handful of URLs that we think you'll find useful. Please feel free to look at those during or after the webinar. On the bottom right corner, you're going to find a survey. We're hoping you could take time at the end to just fill out a couple quick questions so that you can give us feedback about today's session, as well as a little bit of information about yourself. We have two speakers with us today. We have Connor O'Neill, as well as Alex Knoll from NearForm. In addition, we have Brian Clark with us from Microsoft. And I believe at this time, I will hand it over to you, Connor.
Thanks very much, Pamela. Hi, everyone. So as Pamela said, my name is Connor O'Neill. I run product at NearForm. I'm based in Cork, Ireland. So NearForm is headquartered in Ireland, but we actually have offices in New York, and we basically have people spread all over the world. So just to give you a quick summary of our session today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about us. Don't worry, I won't bore you too much. Tell you a little bit about our expertise and our services, and then I'll hand you over to Alex, who's going to do the deep dive into the actual demo, so you can see, full stack JavaScript and Node.js running on Azure and the various ways that we do things. As you can see in the slide there, who are we and what the heck do we know about Node.js? If you're not deeply involved in the Node project, you may not be familiar with us, but I'll just tell you a little bit about us. We've been involved in Node since almost the beginning. We have 7 Node core contributors, so these are people directly contributing to the Node project. And it basically means we're the ones building major parts of the runtime that many of you are using or thinking about using. To give some sort of stats on that, so Node 10 was released a couple of weeks ago, and 27% of the commits for Node 10 actually came from NearFormers. Pretty much all of the major features in Node 10 were run by us outside of the V8 engine itself. And actually the overall release manager for Node 10 was James Snell, who works for NearForm. On top of the core project itself, we're also heavily involved in both the security and diagnostics groups in the project. So that's very important, obviously, not just from a security perspective, but also from a performance and kind of debuggability and insights into how your Node processes are working. So basically, as you can see, we know a few things, I suppose it's fair to say, about Node.js. But actually, it's just one of the open source projects we're involved in. NearFormers, as they're called, have built or maintain a lot of well-known Node projects, things like Fastify and the Happy Web frameworks, a logging tool like Pinot, Mosca, which is the main MQTT broker that's used out there. They all of these come from NearForm or people who work for NearForm. We also have NearForm created projects. So these are things we incubate internally directly ourselves, including the Udario authorization framework, and most recently Node Clinic. So that's back to the diagnostics thing. This is an umbrella project that we've launched for a range of performance diagnostics tools. So if you're struggling to understand why your Node app is, in inverted commas, slow, then you really should run Node Clinic Doctor on it. It's not just a very, very powerful developer tool, but we're finding is it's also extremely useful as an educational tool for people trying to understand, I suppose, the nature of Node and how Node operates in comparison to something like, .NET or J2E and so on. But I suppose the other question is, what do we do? So Node Core is obviously something that we're involved in, but what do we do for a living? We have, a broad range of agile product development teams using full stack JavaScript. So, a huge proportion of what we do as a company is building these full stack JavaScript apps with Node in the background for large enterprises. But we also do consulting and training, not just around Node, but around React and really anything to do with the JavaScript stack itself. We also recently extended that so customers can take advantage of our DevOps and DevSecOps expertise. So, for example, Alex would be involved in that. And that's, slightly separate from our solutions development itself. And then finally, we've just recently launched an open source Node.js distribution for containers, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a minute, and for which we provide commercial support. We obviously have the requisite customer slide. These are brands I'm sure you're all familiar with, and which begs the question of why did they choose NearForm? Why did these global and large US-based organizations choose a company based in Ireland to build very large enterprise web apps for them? We don't have time right here to go into sort of that unique mix of people, process, and tools that's enabled us to deliver at this stage over 150 successful full stack JavaScript applications. But I'll try and summarize it in 2 words. I'll say velocity and repeatability. So when we talk about things like de-risking digital transformation, that's what it's all about for us, delivering quickly and doing it in a repeatable way and enabling our customers to do it in a repeatable way as well. As I mentioned, we've recently launched our Node images for containerized environments. There's a short link there. Alternatively, go onto the NearForm website and find out more. So these are, as I said, containerized images. They run on any sort of Dockerized system, whether it's Docker itself, Kubernetes, managed Kubernetes, as we'll be showing here, Red Hat OpenShift, any of those can make use of these images. They're free to use, so they're, as I said, they're completely open source. They're completely free to use and have been built for Alpine Linux, CentOS, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So you can just pop over to Docker Hub. I think we may have a link there in the in one of the tabs, and you can grab those images from Docker Hub and make use of them as you wish. But if you need commercial support, then we're really here for you for that. So it's far more than in many cases you hear about enterprise support for open source, and it's a box ticking exercise. You need enterprise support because that's your policy. But what we're offering really is far beyond that. Based on what I said at the start, we're a global center of excellence for Node.js. And a lot of our customers are running large-scale Node.js workloads in these containerized environments, and they need proper Node core support. So in other words, if something goes wrong and it's proven to be in Node itself, we're not just the guys who can triage that. We're the people who can actually fix it and get that fixed for you. So we have a full support process around Node core issues. And we have escalation paths to the very people who are, building those major chunks of the Node project itself. Obviously, it's tiered support. We have standard tiers, we have premium tiers with SLAs associated with that. And the pricing is very, very transparent and very clear, and is based on the scale of your deployment. As I said, I didn't want to take up a huge amount of your time. I really want to get you to hear and see what Alex has to do. He's going to demonstrate some really interesting aspects of running Node on Azure. As Pamela said at the start, keep popping the questions into the Q&A section of the panel. If there's any I can address or the Microsoft guys can address as Alex is going through, we'll do so. And then once we get to the end, obviously we can if we have some time, we'll dig into those for you or answer them for you afterwards. But with that, I shall hand over to Alex.
Thank you, Connor. I hope you can all hear me well, and I'll just start sharing my screen right now. And let's see if that is going to work. Here we go. On my screen, it shows sharing. Does that mean it's...
Not quite yet, Alex, from what I can see. I think it's going to take another second or two.
Not seeing it quite yet. If you want to maybe try one more time. There we go. Now it's live.
Yes? Very good.
You got it. You're live.
Okay. Well, I'm one of those guys that is halfway around the world. I'm actually based in Spain, and so really enjoying my work here for NearForm as a DevSecOps engineer. And in this webinar, I really want to show you how we think Azure and all the goodies you can get on the platform really helps to accelerate developing Node.js or full-stack JavaScript applications onto that platform. For that, I'm using an application that was developed by our developer team, or one of our developer teams. This is what you call a progressive web app. It's kind of like a showcase thing because really it's a copy of the Real Hacker News website, but then in a PWA format. Now, I don't really want to go too deep into what PWA is, but it's kind of like a web app that behaves like a mobile app. So you can even add it to your home screen, and then when you click on it, it opens up like it is a real app, but it's written in full stack JavaScript. So, and there's some other cool things to mention about it. We have a blog post on our website around that, explaining everything, why it's cool, and why you should really build some of those things that you are building as PWAs. I think there's a link in the description so you can get to this blog post very easily. Also, it is hosted on GitHub. It's public, so nothing behind any login or something, so you can just pull this thing and play with it yourself, which is actually my entry point into the connection with what I'm going to show you today, and that is that we are using VSTS to deploy this application into an AKS cluster, which is the hosted Kubernetes on Azure. So what we're really doing, so the application you see here is hosted on AKS and is deployed using VSTS build pipeline. So we're not using the Git hosting or Git repository that you could also use in VSTS. Actually, in a previous webinar we did on a similar subject, I showed how you can do that. But I thought it would be interesting to kind of share how you can combine the two, because there's a lot of people using GitHub for applications. Using GitHub. So the way to do that is connecting your workspace in VSTS through the get sources. So the default is obviously VSTS, but you can choose any one of these other ones, and then kind of do the authentication back and forth with OAuth between GitHub and VSTS, so that there's a trust relationship between the two, and that way these two are connected. The next step to get this to work is to add triggers. And what I've done here is I've enabled continuous integration, and then I've included a specific branch, in this case, the one that I'm using for the webinar, to kind of watch, and then whenever there's a change, a commit, a push into that repository, it'll start integrating those changes and run the build pipeline. So in that way, you can basically use VSTS like Circle CI, for instance, or Jenkins. So you don't really have to use always the whole source code repository or all the other great features that are in VSTS. Just to kind of take you through the build pipeline in this case that I've made for this web app. So I wasn't really involved in generating all this code. As I said, that's a team that built the showcase for us. What I have done is worked on how to deploy this thing on AKS. So one of the parts of deploying it onto Kubernetes is building a container out of this application. So that is also the first step in this pipeline. And if I then switch to the code, and let's make sure that you all see this. I know there's a bit of a delay sometimes. So I've now switched to the Docker file that I've created for this application, and it's really super easy. So you start from our NearForm distribution. So in this case, I've chosen the Alpine distribution. We also have a CentOS and a Red Hat Enterprise Linux one. Obviously, I'm using the 8 version, which is the long-term support, the one you should be using in production. And then from then on, it just gets really easy. You set the work there to a place you can write into, which is kind of dictated by the base image, and then a basic flow to copy files, run and install, run a build. In this case, the application needs building because we're generating a lot of things from JavaScript code with a tool called Babel and Webpack. And then we have some, we expose the port 3000, and we have a command which is like the default thing that is run whenever you start this container without any overrides. So that's basically the part that you see here. So the Docker file I showed you before is in the repository on GitHub under infrastructure Docker. Really, we're instructing VSTS to just build this image based on that Docker file. Next step in the pipeline is pushing the image to a registry. Now the registry that you see mentioned here is Pathfinders, and I will switch to the Pathfinders resource group in the Azure Web Console. So you can kind of see not only the registry that we are targeting in this build pipeline, but also all of the other parts that I will come back to in a minute. But the registry is also part of the infrastructure that we provision for this particular application. Oops, let's go back to the pipeline. Here we go. So one of the interesting things here is to give this image a name that is distinguishable between builds. So if I would just build the image without being able to distinguish it, I can't really deploy this specific build or any other specific build if I wanted to. So the build infrastructure has these built-in variables that you can use to kind of make it more dynamic and base the naming of the image in this case on the number of the build. So the build ID is actually the number that is the running build. So if I then go to the Pathfinders registry, and I realize it's a bit slow because I'm sharing bandwidth with my screen sharing, and I go in the web console. I can go to the repositories menu on the left, and there I click the repository that I'm using to build. So let's get back to the build repository name is the name of the actual project. So in this case, it'll be React NearForm React PWA, and that's exactly the name that you see here, because that's the build variable I used. And in there, you see all kinds of numbers. I did a few manual builds, but all these integers are build IDs that were generated by VSTS. So once we have the build inside the Docker registry, the next step is to make VSTS aware of the fact that we're going to do something with Kubernetes. That is downloading the kubectl. So this is like a plugin. I think it comes even from the marketplace. It's not built in, but there are, I would even say, hundreds of plugins that you can get for VSTS to do all kinds of things. kubectl is only one of them, and this one is actually quite elaborate because you can enable a few other things as well, like istoctl and Helm. So this is just downloading it. Next step is using Helm for the actual deployment to the cluster. Now, I kind of skipped over the fact that the K8s endpoint, so the Kubernetes endpoint, is, in this case, pathfinders. And that corresponds to, if I go back to the overview in the resource group, that corresponds to the name of this Kubernetes service, which is AKS inside Azure. It does require in the settings to configure this Pathfinder's endpoint with a kubeconfig, but all of this is really well explained in the documentation. So I won't go too deep into that, but it works exactly like it does from your local or from any jump server that you might be using. So from that point on, anything you do in the same context will be targeting the same target cluster. So for deployment, we are using Helm. Helm is a way to package and kind of maintain a parameterized version of your Kubernetes manifest. So Kubernetes uses YAML files to kind of define an application inside a container running on Kubernetes. So things like what ports should be opened, what image should be used, what volume should be mounted, all of those things are in the manifest. And kind of Helm layers on top of that with a variable syntax so that it makes it very easy to differentiate between different environments, for instance. If I go back to the editor, I can show you a file, a YAML file, which is actually a template used by Helm. And you can see the variables. So the variables are in between curly brackets, I think they're called in mainstream. So these things are interpreted by Helm and then replaced with the values that you want. And in the case of this app, we have two different kinds of two different value files, one for dev and one for generic use, let's say. And in those value files, you'll just see things like, in this case, the repository that we're using for storing the images that we were just pushing to. And then a bunch of other stuff like ports and even the name of the image, a tag in this case. And what Helm just does is use those values and replaces the placeholders in these files with the values that you want. Now, if you want to deploy through VSTS, the tag that we just built and pushed to the registry that kind of means that the value for image tag that we have defined here as a hard-coded value doesn't really help us, right? This would mean that we would always be deploying the 89-100 tag. And this is why you can use the variables again. So in this case, we have a hard-coded version, and let's grab that from here. So deploy the image tag with the actual build ID that we're running at this moment. So this kind of takes the image tag here and overrides whatever is hard-coded in the values file with what I provide on the command line. And after that, really, stuff is deployed, and you can just go and check out things inside your Kubernetes cluster and see that things are running, right? So if you run these commands inside VSTS, you don't really get a lot of output, but I can also run the same thing from my local environment. So I can just do Helm upgrades, React, PWA, and then, well, it's written here. Why don't I just take that one? There we go. So this is the kind of the output that VSTS swallows for us, which is a bit of a that would be nice to see these. So what this gives us is an overview of the things that were deployed, or kind of like the state that it's in after we deployed. So if I didn't change anything, so if I deployed this 89-100 before, nothing happened, and it just gives us the state that was there, which is kind of what I did, because all these pods have been running for an hour. So if we then look at what we can get from the Azure platform besides just the AKS hosted Kubernetes, one of the things that we kind of get for free, or with a few clicks at least, is a container solution. The container solution is something that plugs into the OMS, which is the Operations Management Suite, I think the acronym stands for. So this is where you can do log analytics, for instance, and also plug in a solution. And the one that I really wanted was the container monitoring solution, because it's not only Docker aware, so it knows all about Docker, it is also aware of Kubernetes. And kind of the reason I'm showing you this, just to kind of quickly go through what you see here. So this is really, a few clicks, or if you want to take the route of the resource management templates, it's just another resource in your template that you configure with a few variables. Most of them can stay default, and then you have to add an OMS agent into your cluster, and that's really all there is. In the description, there is a link to the documentation for that, and it's really well explained. It's all you really have to do is install the agent and enable the container solution. So one of the really cool things here is that you could, on any of these screens, you can always click through and zoom in. So you know, in the overview you have container status, so you know what is happening in the cluster. I have a few failed ones, probably from a past deploy, because the time is, I mean, the bracket of time is almost 24 hours. I get all my container logs. I get all the events from the Kubernetes API. So things like image pulling, killing of images, scheduling. You can see all of those things here. I don't have any extra namespaces except for default ones. A few other bits. The nodes give me. I can see all my nodes, and these are like the stats that you may be familiar with from the Docker, from the Kubernetes dashboard. So you see memory stats, CPU, and things like that. And then again, you can zoom in on those. If I then go back to the container logs and I click on one of those, I get to basically the log analytics screen. So this is showing me the logs for a specific container. Now, to be honest, when I saw the screen for the first time, I thought it was pretty daunting. Lots of things on the screen. How can I find something here, right? And actually, it's quite easy to find something, because the syntax for searching is actually quite intuitive. So this is the name of a container. I'm removing most of that name, and I change the double equal sign into a like, and that all of a sudden gives me all of the containers, because I know that all of the containers start with this string. And then from there on, you can, you know, really start digging into, you know, what you want to see. So if you go to the list view, it makes it even easier, because you can say, I only want to have anything from standard out. So I'm not interested in standard error, for instance. And then, okay, I hear some uninteresting things. So let's say I'm interested in a log entry. And let me just remove some of this stuff where log entry, like stories, for instance. Shift enter is executing the query. So now I get all the log entries that mention stories in some way. So, you know, as you can see, it really is very simple to kind of dig into things that you want to search and find. And there, you know, is also extensive documentation around this. The syntax is very elaborate. You can do really interesting things with variables, and also the way they are using pipes instead of like an SQL type query language really makes it quite flexible. One other thing I really wanted to point out here is that any query can very easily be turned into an alert rule. So let's say, well, standard out. Okay, what happened to my, there we go. A standard out typically doesn't output any errors, but let's say I wanted to look for errors, and that's the query you know, I'm interested in to send an alert to anything like Slack or something. You can just use this query as a source for generating an alert, and then in here you can define where you want to send that, how you want to send it, and who you want to send it to. So you know, it really makes it very easy to iterate on these things, because you really typically don't want to have too many alerts. And if you have a very easy interface to change and add those and also remove those, that makes it very very easy to tailor it to what you need in your production system. So just looking at the time, I need to speed up a little bit, I think. So next thing I really wanted to show is the application insights. And this is where there really is a bit of integration between, or quite a tight integration between the Node application and Azure and the tools that you get from it. Because this is something that is generating metrics and also behavior and a few other things from the application, from the Node process. So this is something that is originating from the application, and that works in this way. So you have to install the application insights package, npm install application insights. Couldn't be easier. And here I'm checking if we have this environment variable available to us, then we're going to instantiate it and set a couple of configuration options and start the process, or actually start the function. And what that gives me is a lot of information on the server side, but here at the second graph here in this overview is also giving me page view load time, and that is something that you have to be putting in your front end, because this is something that runs in the browser and is actually targeting the same backend in the applications, in the application insights. But then from a browser perspective. So this gives me, you know, the kind of things that maybe you're used to from App Dynamics or a new relic, something like that. So we're seeing things like what is the server response time and what is the page view load time on the client. Now, it's 4.7 seconds. That's not very good, but that is the initial load time that we're measuring, and not the, well, there is no other load time really, because once you have this thing loaded and you click around, we're not actually loading anything else. It's just requests over AJAX to the backend. Very interesting. Out of the box, you get an application map. So this gives you like a visual overview of what your application is doing in terms of network traffic. Where is it going? So we have the Hacker News RSS feed. So we've done 2 calls. That is only the initial call, and then we're using another GraphQL endpoint. For this, I really refer to a blog post on why we use that and why it is it's working very well in the setup with progressive web apps. And again, you can click on things to zoom into what's going on, and even on all of these things, you can zoom through and then get like a really detailed view of your application, and these are requests that are coming from clients going into the backend and giving me information about okay, in this case, get images is something that failed. You can then click again on those. This one doesn't have any more information. I can get a view of dependencies if there are any. Yeah, this one doesn't have any, obviously. But here, this one gives me a bit more information. So insights is kind of like analyzing what's going on and then giving me probable avenues to investigate, you know, around this issue or around this request, if you want to investigate why this is slow, for instance. So this is when the application is running. Now I'm kind of going to take a few steps back and get into the infrastructure part of things. I mentioned before that in a previous webinar we showed how to provision all these things that you see in this resource group. So I won't go into that today, but the Vault I think is very interesting to have a quick look at, because it's kind of required to not have any hard-coded secrets or anything like that in your production app, right? So the Key Vault in Azure is a feature that is included, and you can use very easily with Kubernetes. So in this case, for the demo, what I've done is I've added a secret, and that is the insights key. So to connect the app to application insights, and this key is just some UUID. And the way to get those secrets into your application is actually right here in the application. We're referring to an environment variable. So process env in Node is an environment variable. So somehow we need to make sure this thing is happening. And how we do that is through the manifest, so the Docker or the Kubernetes manifest. We use an init container, which is something that runs before the actual container in the pod runs, to pull the secrets from the vault. So this is our the URL to the vault, again with a variable, and it shares those secrets in the vault volume mount. The vault volume mount down here is an empty dir on the host, so it disappears whenever the host is rebooted or gone away, and it's also in memory, so it never actually hits a disk. And then as soon as that is shared there on the application container side, so this is our React PWA, we are also mounting this in-memory volume, and then right before we start the app, we just export this application insights instrumentation key by just kind of reading the file that was shared by the Key Vault agent. And then we start the application. So this way ensures that we get the secrets into the app without ever having the app being aware of where they come from, and also without ever writing them to any kind of disk that could be compromised quite easily. Now, what I also wanted to show you right before I have to go out, I think, for Q&A. One of the things that Kubernetes brings you is if you are used to Node.js in a more traditional way, so maybe spinning those things up with PM2 or Forever or any of those tools that kind of keep your process alive, you can kind of offload that responsibility to Kubernetes. So in this case, in my Helm chart, I've defined that I want three application processes. And then what Kubernetes does, there's a service that sits in front of these three node processes. So that'd be this one, and that one kind of load balances, multiplexes between those three. So if I would go ahead and delete, let's say, the first one, and let me show you that there we go. I forgot the pod part of it. There we go. So pod is actually deleted, and we're having one pod initializing, the other one's deleted, and I can go to the app and refresh the page and see that it still works as expected. Because what happens inside Kubernetes is as soon as there's a delete or even a crash, the service is notified, and the service will take that one out of commission and not route any more requests to it. So really, as an application developer, you don't have to worry about, how is this thing going to run. That will be taken care of by Kubernetes, and it's actually one of the killer features of Kubernetes. And I think with that, I have come to the end of what I wanted to show. So I guess we are ready for questions.
Sorry, Alex, just coughing there. We only have one question so far, so please, everyone, feel free to pop questions into that Q&A box at the bottom of your console there. A quite straightforward one from Rob wondering what language was used when you were in that Azure query console. Is it some sort of PowerShell thing, or what language is involved there?
What it's actually called, I don't know. I think it's specific to the log analytics of Azure, but I could probably click through to the like in anything here. I'll probably click through to the documentation. Legacy language converter. Nah. Yeah, this is specific, and it even has autocomplete. Here we go, syntax reference. I knew there's a link. Now, of course, this takes a little bit. To be honest, I haven't really needed to look into this too deep, but as with everything, once you get to like real production and you have specific things you want to look for, then yeah, definitely you're going to need more advanced things than just a like or a simple search. I get that, but it's the documentation here is quite extensive. And language reference. Here we go. Example. So there's lots of things here to investigate. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, he says thanks for sharing that link. That's great. Thanks, Alex. I'll just pop on to just one last slide there. If you want to stop sharing your screen. Yeah, you may as well stop.
Do that. So I'm stopped, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, but it looks like we're back. We're back to the slides.
Excellent. So yeah, really what we wanted to just touch on there in that last slide was, what about you, those people on the webinar here, what's next for you if you're, if either you haven't embraced Node itself and full stack JavaScript development yet, or you have and you're looking to kind of do that on Azure and particularly do it on AKS, and make use of all the functionality provided by kind of managed Kubernetes. It's the similar advice we give most people. We suggest you start with an individual service or a microservice and figure out, all the nitty gritty around that. We obviously say use Node. We highly recommend Node 8, even though Node 10 is available. We generally recommend the LTS releases. That's what we commercially support. We don't consider Node 10 to be suitable for production purposes yet. It will be as the year progresses. In terms of front end, whilst there's still a lot of Angular out there, and there's people using Vue and so on, the vast majority of the work we do is with React on the front end, and as you can see with that PWA, it really has just completely dominated over the past couple of years. and really taken over from Angular for front-end work. Obviously, discover, as we say, the joy of hundreds of thousands of Node modules that basically do all the heavy lifting for you. So there's, if you can think of anything, there's a Node module there that will do the work for you. We highly encourage you to use our images, either commercially or not. Just make use of those images. We aim to always be, effectively the most up-to-date out there. Our build system is set up so that within less than an hour of a Node Foundation release or a base OS image update, we're building that and we're making those images available in Docker Hub. So that's the sort of time scale. You're not talking days, weeks, or months. You're talking generally the same day to get the latest release that has been done by the Node Foundation. Obviously, make use of any of those tools we have. As I said, a lot of people are making use of things like Fastify and Pinot, particularly people who are very interested in performance, and obviously leverage all the expertise we have, and clearly, deploy to Azure. I noticed that, and particularly let us know how you're getting on. I know there's a few questions there, Alex. Have we have a quick look there on those? Can you see that Q&A, Alex?
Yeah, I see there's a question. How come Azure can build an application map? It enriches all calls to HTTP. That is almost correct. What it does, it intercepts the calls. So it just looks for what HTTP calls are being done by the process, and then reports those and sends the calls on to where they needed to go to.
Thanks for that. Run through that.
It looks like there is one URL that was redirecting incorrectly as well. I am going to pop the correct URL into the Q&A box for everyone. I will do that shortly.
I'd say it's a capitalization thing. Those Bitly URLs are case sensitive, so we just may have lost it. May have lost some capitalization there. Thanks for that, Pamela. And the other main thing is, obviously, feel free to reach out to us via the website and so on. I know it sounds a little bit old-fashioned to say it, but I strongly recommend you check out our blog. We are doing an enormous amount of work, most of which gets released and published via the blog. And that's not just on Node, it's on front end, it's on DevOps, it's on machine learning and data science. We're doing a massive range of R&D work, and the vast majority of it is open source and in the wild. You can see a lot of it on our GitHub repos as well, where you'll find lots of content. If none of that's sufficient for you, you can reach out to me. It's connor.o'neill@nearform.com. So 1 N in Connor, 2 L's in Neil, unusually, I know. Mail me directly. I might know the answer to your question, but I definitely know people who will know the answers, as you can see from everything you've learned from Alex today. I'm not seeing any more in terms of Q&A. I'll give it another minute or so there. Alex, is there anything else you wanted to cover at all?
No, I think I covered everything I wanted to say.
We just had a question there, which we probably don't know the answer to. I don't know, do you Microsoft guys know the answer to that? Are there labs available for Node.js on Microsoft Virtual Labs?
Hey, Brian Clark here. So that I'm not particularly sure of. We'll have to double check on that. But the one thing I did want to add is that on docs.microsoft.com, we have a lot of resources and documentation there specific to Node and running it on Azure that should be helpful in that regard.
Thanks for that. And just one other thing there. We did a post this morning. Chris Draycott Weekly did a post specifically related to what we're talking about here. So talking about enabling you to spin up the PWA, both I think on Minikube locally on your machine, and then deploying it into Azure. So if you want to kind of follow along with some of the stuff that Alex has done there, it's available to you. Diego Cunha also did the original post on the PWA, the PWA itself, the benefits of them, and the reason we use the Hacker News one. There's plenty of reasons for that, but if PWAs are of interest to you, and with the even Apple embracing them more now, and most of the major browsers and all the recent browsers having full support for PWAs, it's becoming a big thing, and particularly in an enterprise context. I see there is a URL being shared there that I don't know, Pamela, do you want to post that out to the wider audience there? It's a hands-on lab. Oh, and one more question.
I will see if I can. I'm going to just make sure that renders properly, and then I will share that.
Super.
Yeah, I see a question about how to troubleshoot an individual pod. For that, it's actually quite easy if you use the container solution and then click on any of the pods. You can even go in the other way and get all the logs from all the pods, and then on the left side, in the left column, you will see all the different pods that are contained in that query result, and you can choose the pod that you are interested in and just click on that, and then it will start filtering on that exact pod, so all the logs that are coming out of that one. So that's how I would go about that. I hope that answers your question.
And I just flagged there, I don't like to talk about it, but we're working on a lot of stuff. I mentioned Node. We're working on a lot of stuff there that if you're particularly interested in troubleshooting performance in a pod, and the performance specifically of your Node application, again, just keep an eye on what we're releasing there. There's going to be some really interesting stuff coming over the next couple of months. As I said, specifically around node performance in pods.
All right, I think we are just about ready to wrap it up. Would like to just thank you all, Connor, Alex, and Brian, all for joining us today. And we're hoping we can see all of you at an upcoming webcast. Thanks so much, you guys.
Great. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Pamela.
Thank you.